you still love me.
All right, good deal.
It's leaving me.
I do, thank you. Good to see you tonight. I don't smile good, man. I just. All right, okay.
I'll never
I hate to get my picture made. I just.
make you believe. It's all I can do. Can hold you close when you're not with me. You're somebody's love. You'll never be mine. Break the
Good evening, everyone. It's 6:30, and we'd like to go ahead and try to get started. I know there are people still coming in, and I apologize for the sun. I hope you're going to be able to see the screen. We took the lights in the building down, so maybe that will help some. And if it gets too dark in here, then I will try to turn those lights back on. But anyway, just a couple housekeeping things. At the end of the program, we're going to ask that everyone please remain in your seats. We have a couple things that the Historical Society would like to share with you, and we need to do that at the end of the program. So if you would please just stay in your seats just a few minutes. I know you're going to be wanting to go to the History Center to see the exhibit, but it'll still be there. So just give us a few minutes at the end. It will not take long. Also, if you need the restroom, some of you that are not familiar with this building, go out the door over here, go down the hallway, and you will see a sign that will direct you to the restrooms as you go all the way down the hall. So that should take care of that. We're glad to see such a good crowd tonight. Some of you have been waiting a long time for this program. This is a program that has been requested, and we were very pleased when Jim Lisk agreed to make time to do the research to prepare for this program. He's going to talk about one of the most important industries in Stanley County. That was our textile mills. Jim is an Albemarle native and a 1961 graduate of Albemarle High School. At one point, he thought about studying to be a sports writer, but when he was awarded the Dixon Foundation Scholarship to study textiles at NC State University, Jim said that sports writing was stored away, not forgotten, but stored away. The scholarship he received bore the name of the CEO of American and Eford Mills and was presented to Jim by Wells Rogers, the plant superintendent. Jim graduated with a BS in textiles from NC State in 1965. He spent 40 years working in the textile industry. During that time, he worked in 8 different companies. Each opportunity was important to him, but Jim says that probably Burlington was his very favorite. He has been married to his wife Hazeline for 56 years. They have 4 sons and 11 grandchildren. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Jim, and we will hear about the program Remember the Lintheads, the important role that they have played in the development of our community. Jim Lisk.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate all of you coming tonight. Some of you I know, some of you I don't know. If you were ever a Linthead, I know you're a brother of mine or a sister. That's an elite group. We worked hard, we cared about our kids, and we tried to make a pathway for them that would be a little better than the one we had. That was certainly the way my parents raised us, and I'm sure most of you Linthead kids will remember that from your parents as well. As Pat said, I did go to NC State. I did want to be a sports writer because I've always loved sports. Where the Stanley News and Press is right now was a vacant field when I was a kid growing up on Depot. And that field we called the big field. My brother Larry's back there. I don't know if anybody else from that group is here, but we had a neighborhood, a bunch of boys. We'd play ball all day down there. It was a great time for us. But about 3:30 or so, you better watch out. Better not foul a ball back, because the buses would start coming in from out in the county bringing workers into the mill. And those bus loads, I don't know how many ran, but there was a bunch of them. If you remember the doctor's presentation last time, Madge Gaskin, is that right? I believe she said she treated or gave physicals to Wiscasset employees free, and there were at least 5,000 at one time. And I'm going to give you some numbers later that absolutely blew me away. But in the 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, I'm sure Wiscasset and American Eford both were at the top levels of meals in America. Those pictures you were seeing of the kids working, they tugged at my heartstrings. I was down in that field we called the big field playing ball when I was 9, 10, 11 years old. These were kids who were in the mill working. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But you saw the name of the man that took those pictures. His name was Lewis Hine. He was a sociologist. He had studied in Chicago, New York City, and later taught in New York. And he took his students over to Ellis Island to see the immigrants coming into this country. He started taking pictures of those people, and he realized that he could make something positive happen through photography. So he shifted gears. He gave up his teaching career and became a photographer all the way. Google his name, Lewis Hine, and you'll read more about him. But those pictures of the mill kids were shot about 1913. And one of them became a key figure in a novel, and that young girl wasn't working in North Carolina. She was working in Vermont. So his shooting of pictures just was not textiles in our state, but all over the country. Okay, let me find my thing right here. Oh, I'm dinging. Where's my... I'm the wrong arrow. I'm sorry. Had it this, not this way, but that's the right way. All right. These are some truisms, I call them. Things I observed, heard in the textile mill. The first 4 of them are about running a mill. And I did edit the first one for everybody tonight. But I heard that one more than anything. You can't make chicken salad from chicken manure. And that most often spoke about when you're trying to run a cotton mill and you lap up from one end of that spinning room to the other. Now, when you go across to the exhibit, Miriam Wilhoit's mother, Miriam brought in about 6 of her stand hooks. It's like a screwdriver with a hook on the end. And that end is just lapping up, going around. It's not going down making yarn. It's lapping, just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I saw spinners when I was 16 years old sweeping the floor, fighting those lap-ups with that stand hook. And you really wasn't supposed to use the stand hook. But when you got a half the frame lapped up, you do what you got to do. She would have that stand hook, trying to get that lap-up off, take it off, put it in her apron, reach over in a roving buggy, grab her sandwich that was wrapped in wax paper, take a bite, put it back, nudge the buggy down the alley, fight another one. All night long, 8 hours. And this time of year, a seasonal change, mills got tore up real often. But our farmer friends often played a huge part in that. And I didn't learn that till late in my career. When they don't spray the cotton, aphids have to go to the bathroom too. And when they go, they secrete this sticky substance that makes that fiber want to stick to everything it touches. And it'll wrap around that roll, and you'll have sticky cotton lap-ups all over a mill. I started turning gray early from all those problems, and eventually all my hair fell out. So I don't recommend sticky cotton to anybody. And the only constant is change. That's said about most things, and very true. Floors clean enough to eat off of. We'll talk about Wiscasset under Denning later. They believed in that very strongly, and they had programs that put them at a level above most people for that very reason right there. And my first job training out of college, I followed a guy around that was 6'4". Name was Oscar Randolph. And we had a lot of territory to cover down in that card room. He walked my tail off. And he hit me with that line right there one time. He says, I've seen it go on like this for weeks, then take a turn for the worst. I wasn't ready for that worst. But the big problem we were having, we were making bottom weight and top shirts for work uniforms. We'd have a band about an inch wide that was heavy yarn, followed by a band that was thin yarn. So you pull all that out and get a repeat, do some calculations. We knew it was coming from finisher drawing down in the card room, but we could never find it. May 9th, 1966 was those defining moments in my life. When I came up on a draw frame, the girl had it running with a chalk box holding the lid up. I pulled the chalk box out, closed the lid, and the frame knocked off. I raised the lid, and the big second roll in there was cocked. She had had a lap up, and in her haste, she had weighted it wrongly. One flap was this way, the other flap that way. Instead of being perpendicular over the bottom rolls, it was in there cocked. Eccentric motion, not a true round circle. We took that to the lab. It ran off the evenest chart, took it to roving, made roving, put it in filling, duplicated the problem. That's how I became a quality control man. All right, this is late in my career when I was working with Cotton Incorporated. This is Ningbo, China, a big, big mill. The picture on the left, that young lady, was the top executive in that plant. The fella to my left was the Communist Party worker. He traveled with us everywhere we went. On the second picture over there, somebody mentioned sliver to me a little earlier. That is a card can of sliver. And I'm just doing a photo op, to be honest with you. But it looks like I'm looking at the sliver, seeing the nips and so forth that's in that sliver. There's a little lady in the middle. Now, she was like the plant manager of that plant. So again, you got females at a high level in China that blew me away. This is part 2 of the truisms, and this relates to people. There are a lot of good people, then there are those who just don't really care. And I'm sure that's true in anywhere you worked. It's true at most places I worked, but by far, the vast majority of people I worked with cared about their jobs and tried to do a good job. And you're only as good as the people you work with. There's a fellow back here tonight named Kent Cook. He was the last man out at Wiscasset. When I worked at Wiscasset, Kent ran Mill 3 over here at Toby Webb Stadium. He was the plant manager of that plant. Ran open-end yarns, sold it to T-shirt makers and that kind of thing. But when the mill shut down, Kent was asked to stay on, and he sold off the machinery. But on March 31st, 2000, he went out the door, closed it. His textile career ended. The next day, April 1st, he stepped in down here at the tire place at the bridge and began a new chapter in his life. For him, when one door closes, another opens. And it was selling tires for him. I buy my tires there. I highly recommend it. You can pay me later, Kent. All right. As anything you do in life, if you're coaching a football team or anything you do, there are fundamentals that make or break you. These are the fundamentals of making world-class yarn. At the bottom, and I'm talking about a plant called Ramtex, which was the former Burlington plant, was sold off in 1987 when Burlington went through a hostile takeover. It's the best plant I ever worked in. It was bought by Tao Apparel out of Hong Kong. The man that changed that plant, the Ramseur plant, back in the day, 50s or early 60s, from a worsted plant to a polycotton plant, was my all-time favorite textile man that I worked with. His name was Feaster Newton. He was out of Asheboro. His father worked in the mills in New England and moved to South Carolina. Feaster had gone to Georgia Tech, and he had 3 daughters. They went to Carolina, so we would sit on a bed, watch State Carolina games, and if Carolina won, he gave me a rough time. Not bad. He was too nice of a guy. But I always think of Feaster Newton and Wells Rogers in the same category. I knew Wells as a man, I was a kid. I worked with Feaster day to day. They both had outgoing personalities in that they loved people, cared about people. And in Feaster's case, we had one man I worked with that committed suicide. And I'm told he went and told one guy he was going to do it, and that was Feaster Newton. Feaster changed it over, and the people at the top of this pyramid, he was the man responsible for training most of them. So the Ramtex plant, the Ramsewer plant in Burlington days, had an outstanding workforce. They had 850 people. It was stable, only 13% annualized turnover. The people had 16 and a half years service. So at the top you got the people, at the bottom you got the equipment. If you'll marry those two with the fiber, the right cotton, you're going to make a world-class yarn. And Ramtex did that. And I'm going to show you some of the numbers that will imprint that on your brain for a minute. By far the most important number up there is Euster CV. And this is electronically done on a Euster tester. It's like cutting a cross-section electronically of yarn as it runs through this piece of equipment. The less that cross-section varies from cross-section to cross-section, the more even that yarn is, the lower the number. So we had at Ramtex 14.86. Everybody else was over 17. That evenness also translates to stronger yarn. And the break factor above that, you reel a skein of yarn 120 yards. You put it on a tester and you pull it down, it breaks, and it gives you a number in pounds. You multiply by the yarn number and you come up with this break factor. 2709 is much superior to any other number up there. This was a 50 singles yarn, and we sold it to knitters. They made little girls and ladies cotton tights. But there was a yarn maker over in Bangkok, Thailand, that was superior to us. Our major weaving yarn was 40s going into shirting. We bought Bangkok, Thailand K Cotton's 40s and ran it in our looms better than our yarn, and that allowed me to sell our yarn. But the significant thing they did, we took out 14% Noel, they took out 22. And I'll show you a picture in a little while, you can see what Noel is. But if you used a cotton swab in your ear today, you've used Comer Noel that has been bleached. A cotton ball, those kind of products are made from Comer Noel. All right, I want to talk now about some early mills. The first two mills attempted in the South were in South Carolina, one on a high hill surrounding Santee, the other James Island near Charleston. Neither one of those succeeded. That was 1789. That's a long time ago. Long time ago. They were not successful. This is the first successful mill in North Carolina. It was built on a stream there, you can see, in Lincolnton. I assume those little houses up there on the hill are probably mill housing. Because people had to have somewhere to work. There's a long way to get to a mill for most people. That mill was 1813. Making that was started by a man out of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And they had bought the equipment up in Providence, Rhode Island, and they had to haul it from Philadelphia on whatever they could get a horse to pull, I guess, and get the equipment down here. But there was a man at the plant also that was an iron worker, so he made some of the equipment. But that's 1813. In 1817, you can't see that picture very well. That was a block mill made by slave labor. And I had an article from 1932. I'm sorry. Let me see. That mill was still running. 1832, I guess it was, which was owned by the same family, running in the same place. All right, this is the first mill run by steam. It was in Greensboro, North Carolina. They had problems getting enough wood to feed the boiler to make the steam to run the mill. So they picked up ship and they moved over to Gaston County, when in its day was the most textile spindles in the world were in Gaston County. This is the Pinhook Mill in Gaston County, and this is the Lineberger family, their first venture into textiles. And it says that later they were up to 20 comb cotton mills in Gaston County. In 1984, the Lineberger Cancer Research Center on the UMC campus was opened. So a lot of money made in textiles, and you're going to see that the leaders did stuff for the people. They built hospitals, YMCAs, cancer centers, so forth. This is Hope Mill in Alamance County. We lived in Burlington when I got out of school. One of my better friends worked at Hope Knitting Mills, so that was very successful. I think they built several mills too. Richmond Manufacturing in Great Falls, and that is amazing from 1836. I don't know what model that car is, but obviously they turned that into apartments or something, but a lot of mills have turned into that kind of thing. I'm sorry about my cough. I'm fighting it hard. John Moorhead built a mill up in Leakesville. By 1840, there were 25 mills operating in North Carolina. 17,000 spindles, that's not very much, but that's, for 1840, I guess that's pretty good. But most of them were restored by the Union armies during the war. By 1870, the industry was getting back on its feet a little bit. That mill there from Randolph County reminds me of a mill down in Worthville, and I'm not sure if it's the same mill or not, but it reminds me of the Fieldcrest plant down there when we lived up in Randolph County. All right, the textile mills come to Albemarle. The first mills were planning begun in 1896. Eford Mill was opened in 1897, Wiscasset 1898. The two men that opened it were Eford opened in 97 with 2,496 spindles, consumed 1,000 bales of cotton. A bale of cotton, rough ballpark figures, 500 pounds, so you can do the math. These are the two men that opened both mills. The man on the left, James W. Cannon, was the father of Charles Cannon. I'd heard of him all my life, but I'd never heard of James Cannon. If there was ever a giant in the textile industry around here, that is him, James W. Cannon. This is Mr. Thomas Denning. We'll talk about him a little bit more in a minute. He came to Wiscasset in 1900 as superintendent, and he worked to 1950 as superintendent. And as you're going to see, father, son, father, son, father, son, his son followed him. Wade Denning followed him. It just was everywhere you went. We'll look at these people and those last two names down there, Minnie Smith and John Spates. You probably won't find them written up anywhere in the Hall of Fame like some of these other fellows, but Minnie Smith started working as a spinner at 11 years old in 1912. John Spates started at 9 years old in the mill, and that's why those pictures mean so much to me. I know Minnie's grandson brought some stuff into the Historic Center. I think it's on display later for you to see. All right, here's James W. Cannon, 1852. He moved from Mecklenburg County. He started out working in a mercantile office run by his older brother. 1882, he built his first mill. It was a yarn mill. Later, he added weaving, and it wasn't long before he was adding mills all over Cabarrus County and all over Piedmont, North Carolina. Eventually, he's the man that built Kannapolis, the largest unincorporated city in the world at that time. Let me find some things I want to read to you about him in a minute. He died in 1921. And this is what was said about the businesses and the mills that he was associated with. All the businesses in Concord closed from 1 to 3, while all the mills with which he was connected closed down a half a day out of respect. There's one other thing I want to say about him. I think you'll see a correlation with Albemarle. 1907, they built a YMCA in Kannapolis. 1924, they built a second one, and it was completed in 26. It was the largest YMCA in the South, had 6,400 members. 6,400 members. And it said that at that time, Kannapolis had a population of 44,000 people, so that blew me away too. But a very influential man was James Cannon. When he died, present CEO was actively engaged in 18 companies. That's kind of mind-boggling to me. He's buried there in Oakwood Cemetery in Concord. This is his widow, Mary Ella Cannon. And if you've ever gone to the hospital in Concord, she's the lady that donated the land to the county to build that hospital, Mary Ella Cannon. She also donated an organ to First Presbyterian Church. She donated to the Jackson Training School. She donated to the orphanages up around Troutman. What's the name of that one? And one up in the mountains. So she was very thoughtful, caring person. She and James had 10 kids. Charles Cannon was the youngest son. And Chris Bramlett told me a story about an old-timer from here when he first moved here. And he was talking about the mills and James Cannon and Mr. Eford going to New York to buy the cotton. And there was a party going on the floor below them. And as they concluded their purchasing decisions, they walked down to the party, and one of James Cannon's sons was having a big time. And James Cannon oft talked to Mr. Eford about he didn't know which son was going to follow him. But he said that day, I know which one is not going to follow me. All right, now this we're going to get into the Dennings, Thomas Denning. He was born February 4, 1870 in Rockingham County. His father worked for Plaid Mills, and his father built Ossipee Mills. Anybody ever been to Ossipee? It's right outside of Burlington. We lived in Burlington out of school, and our next door neighbor finished Ossipee High School or something like that. So. All right, this is where Mr. Denning lived, and David Scarborough has done an incredible job remodeling that house. But it's unreal to me that he began in March 1900 as superintendent of Wiscasset Mills, and he was on the job for 50 years. You talk about stability. Certainly, textiles was a paternalistic society, took care of its peoples. He's the man that built the Wiscasset Mill Village. And in 1933, in the throes of the Great Depression, he did what textile people do that are successful. He threw out his old equipment, bought new modern equipment, the best he could buy in 1933. I saw it in my career. When I got out of state in '65, your senior project, your last semester, they give you a swatch of fabric, about a 6x6 swatch. You have to analyze the weave. You have to analyze the yarns in that fabric. And they tell you to build a mill to weave so many yards of that fabric. So what you did, you went down to the school library, and there were books about this thick, cycle and whiting. That was the yarn making equipment. On the loom side, there was Draper and Crompton and Knowles, or C&K. So everything was American made. When I got out of school and started working at Cone and Gibsonville, we had Whiting and Cycle Lowell yarn equipment, and we had Draper looms. We had the same equipment that Mr. Denning started putting in the mill in 1933. My first day on the job with Klopman Mills, June 1, 1973. I'm in my office, been introduced to people by a wonderful gentleman named Jim Moore. About that time, a guy stuck his head in the door, looked at me, didn't say, give me his name or anything. He said, "What do you know about open end spinning?" I said, "I've heard of it." He said, "You better be learning." So open end spinning is the new technology. Up to that time, all the yarn was ring spinning. And Klopman had a plant down outside of Rome, Georgia, would do about 800,000 pounds a week. Pretty heavy yarns. We worked bottom weight slack fabric and so forth. And I think, I was never told officially, but I think in their mind they were going to change that whole mill over to open end spinning. And I was a guy challenged to make it work. But when we got our first frames in, the strength of the open end yarn was about half of the ring spinning. And with ring spinning, you got a twist. It's either a Z direction or an S. Z is by far the most dominant. So if you're weaving a twill fabric, you have to make it go one way to make that twill distinct or stand out. With open end spinning, it was all false twist. There was no true twist in the yarn. So you couldn't get that twill effect that you wanted if you try to make a twill fabric. A lot of stuff to overcome. Mr. Denning is buried here, a very influential man. His son Wade followed him. Now here's two of my favorites for tonight. Let me get my stories out for these two folks. I'm okay. I just need more hands than I got. This is Minnie Smith and John Spates. These were companion articles in the Snap on October 31st, '61. And they talk about their starting in mills when they were little kids. Minnie says, "I started to work when I was between the age of 11 and 12. That would be in the year of 1912. When I first got started in work, most of the workers were children. Most of them came to work barefoot, and we had to stand on the rail to reach our roving. After we learned to spin, they would put us on one side. And when we would ball up, we would just all fall down in the floor and cry. We had 4 doffers and 1 head doffer to a frame. The head doffer would start the frame and piece it up. The older men would swept by pushing 2 mops, and the little boys picked up the waste. When we drank water, there was only 1 cup, and it was just an old tin cup, and everyone used it. Machinery was run by big overhead belts and steam. We had some huge spinning frames that ran warp, and the thread was straight up and down on the bobbin. It had a need for the roving. All right, let me see. The one thing that stands out in my mind is that the meal is as much cleaner today than in the old days. The best I can remember, we were paid 10 cents a day when I started running 6 sides. Then I got $3 a day for every 2 weeks. We were paid in cash instead of by check. In my career, I have seen 3 different sets of spinning frames put in this mill where I have been there. So she ended up working 63 years, and I'm not sure. So she retired sometime in the 70s. But she saw 6 different sets of frames. So all the mills kept modernizing. And I gave you a poem early on, and in there, there's a line in there about the shallow pocket that were left dismayed. If you didn't have the money to buy the new equipment, that base under that pyramid, the world class, you had a hard hill to climb. You had to have the equipment. You had to have those 3 things. You had to have the equipment, you had to have the people at the top, and you had to have the right fiber. 10 cents a day, later 25. And they had a pretty long work day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. I know the whistle from Wiscasset is in the display across the street. In one of the articles I read about Minnie, she said they would blow the whistle at 4:30 to wake everybody up, and they had to be on the job at 6. So I never heard the whistle blow. I grew up on Depot, but I never heard a whistle blow. All right, let's talk about the Rogers brothers and father. E.M.L. Rogers, he started pretty young too, 14. He worked for Wiscasset first for 18 years. Became superintendent of Dillon Cotton Mill in 21. Came back to Eford Mill in 25. He retired in 1953. Replaced by his son, Wells. And Wells' daughter is sitting up front today, and I'm thrilled that she's here. And there was an article in the Snap at his retirement talking about his incredible family. He and his wife, Carrie Moody, had 9 children. Wells and Bill, is Bill here? All right, Bill, good job. Bill is here. Bill, were you the youngest? Next to the youngest, okay. And like his dad and his brother, Bill back there became superintendent later in his career. And we've often been on trips with the senior center. And I love sharing mill stories with Bill. We have a good time sharing those stories. Look at Wells Rogers, graduated that wonderful school we call NC State. Worked for Eford for 40, and I love this when he started on the Almall School Board for 18 years. I believe we could use some more Wells Rogers on the school board, and David Grigg for that much too. Member of the Lions Club for 31 years. And I got a Lions Club story for you. I was fortunate enough in high school to have a wonderful choral director named Paul Fry. He was also my church choir director, and I was blessed to have him at both places. But he would often take us down to entertain the Lions Club at the Almall Hotel. It was my junior year, I remember vividly. Bob Harris, some of you might recall, he was my neighbor up the street. His dad was the lint head down in American Eford. Bob decided he didn't want to work in the mill, so he started running his mouth at Duke University, did pretty good. But we were at the Almall Hotel out in the lobby, and In the Still of the Night was a great hit in those days. And we're standing waiting our turn to go in and entertain the Lions Club after their meal. and Bob Harris took off on the lead. Bob's never been afraid to jump in and take off, so he did. And everybody jumped in with the doo-wops behind him, so it sounded pretty good. But we go on in, get on the risers, and we stand in there and we look out at the audience, and all the men had their uniforms on. They had their best suits on, they had their white shirts, probably made at Klopman Mills Ram Sewer Plant. They had their ties on, and they had their other piece of their uniform in their right hand, and they were sucking on those things. And the smoke filled the room, burned my eyes, and I couldn't even see who they were out there. I'll never forget that, thank God, we got rid of that one, that we don't have the cigarette to deal with anymore. All right. These numbers absolutely blew me away when I found them. This is 10/8/52. Wiscasset has a banquet for the 25-year club up at the YMCA. And look at those numbers. There were 45 club members with 33 members with 45 years, 123 with 35, 359 with 25, 599 with 15. That's 1,014 employees with over 14 years of service. That was the top of the pyramid, and they knew how to get the cotton. Mr. Denning knew how to buy the cotton. He left his older son out of it, Charlie, those deals when they were buying the cotton. All right, this is the menu they had that night, and it reminds me very much of a Thanksgiving Day feast. And it was certainly the theme of the evening, because when you got 1,014 employees that know what they're doing, you got a good chance to succeed. If you got the equipment and the right cotton, you got those kind of people, you're going to be successful. Eford Mills also had growth. Some of these numbers don't actually G-Hall, but this is the Stanley News and Press. I worked there, so I know all the numbers aren't always right. Went from 2,496 spindles in 1897 to 54 and 40, 1961, or 64.5, 700 employees, 1971, 64.2 with 750. All right, this is a timeline for American and Eford. It opened in 97. American Yarn took control in 47, merged to create American and Eford in 52. In 77, it was purchased by Union Underwear, and then Fruit of Loom in turn purchased them. And in 1995, 402 employees went out the door in American and Eford. Fruit of Loom closed their door. All right, what textiles meant to North Carolina in 1961. That's the year I finished high school. Let me find out. If I can get this cough stopped. No, that's good. All right, let me just go on to the next slide. There's some important numbers in there, but one of the numbers is $3.1 billion in sales for the North Carolina textile companies. One in two workers, I think, in the industry worked in textiles. And this is what the governor, Terry Sanford, said at the time: no other industry has meant more to our industrial progress. I urge all North Carolinians to become better acquainted with the textile industry of North Carolina. That was 1961. Some way we didn't get that adhered to. All right, I want to talk about a man named Fred Barbie. He epitomized this, and I wish I had a picture of him. Here we go. Fred grew up in a community called Allman with 9 siblings. He left Millenport School to help on the farm after his brother left for World War II. I worked for a plant manager one time from Alabama who had worked in the mills at night, and he had helped educate all of his siblings, and they were doctors and lawyers and outstanding people. So he paid the price, and the younger ones followed him, got the benefit. Fred began as a sweeper in American Eford. In 1948, he had made 87 cents an hour. He began sweeping, the hauling, roving, the spinning doffer. He did them all. And that's pretty much the norm. You start sweeping about any time you entered the mill. Eventually became a supervisor in winding on the third shift. He took night classes through American and Eford and correspondence courses with Scranton, Pennsylvania School of Textiles, earning an associate degree. I saw a lot of supervisors that took those Scranton school classes. At 57, he received an associate degree in public relations through Central Piedmont Community College. And in 1964, then Superintendent Belvin Furr chose Fred for a vital job. Fred was chosen to integrate production workers in American and Eford mills. It was 1964. As you look at the American Eford pictures across the way, you'll see one black man. His name was Joe Cross. He was the mailman. He carried mail between the plants and the main office and all day long. He was also a catcher on a black semi-pro baseball team. And I lived directly across the street, and I was a pitcher in Little League. So I would go over and throw to Joe on his lunch break sometime. In the old Morton ballpark, Dad took us down there to see Joe and his team play. And the umpires were late getting there, about an hour late, so you thought the gas hound game was out there. They were throwing the ball behind their back, doing a Harlem Globetrotter pregame exercises just to not get bored to death. But the thing I remember about that night, some big guy hit a grand slam over the left center field fence. I don't think the ball's ever come down yet. He crushed it. And Fred said this of Sue Harris, the young black lady. We never had a crossword. She was an excellent employee, a good friend, and a helpful lady. When I interviewed Fred in 2005 for this article in the Snap, he told me that Sue Harris was up at one of the nursing homes. I went to see her, found her sitting in her wheelchair out in the lobby, but her mind had long gone. Dementia had set in, so I did not get to get her side of the story, but from all indications, she was a fine worker. He also dealt with a problem that I'm sure a lot of guys dealt with in the mill. It's a paternal society. Your boss is your daddy in a sense. He told this young girl, now you stay away from that guy. He's going to get you in trouble. Sure enough, she didn't stay away. She did get pregnant. So she came to Fred. She wanted to abort herself. Fred talked her out of it. Why don't you go down to Florida where your sister's at? Live with her. She'll take care of you. You have that baby. So that happened. 3 years later, Fred said he was going to his car in the parking lot one morning. He hears his name called. And there's this young lady with a 3-year-old daughter proudly showing it to Fred. If it wasn't for you, Fred, she wouldn't be here today. Paternal society, caring bosses, you can't replace them. Fred retired at 62 with 44 years of service. And I'll lay one more on you, and I'm sure you're not surprised at this. He taught Sunday school at Canton Baptist Church for 50 years. All right. Quality issues, raising havoc. That was my life. And that guy on the right is the dreaded aphid. And I could talk all night about this, putting out fires with lap-ups and blow-ups. But I'll mention another fiber. All of you are familiar with the Girl Scout and Boy Scout uniform, right? Girl Scout and Brownie, Girl Scout and Brownie. So you had polycotton in the warp, and you had 100% of a second polyester in the filling going crossways. That polyester was a real weak fiber that took another kind of dye. It wouldn't dye with the warp. So it was white. That fiber was Dacron T64. At this time of the year, around draw frames, it would lap. So what you do is the tech guy for the plants, I call the fiber producer DuPont. Bob Byram would meet me at the plant. And we'd work through finish changes on the fiber. We'd try to do everything, get the humidity down, do everything you can. But the story goes that before I took the job, they were fighting one of those situations. It was Friday evening. Everybody was hot and sweaty and torn up, worn out. And they go in the overseer's office, and they're getting ready to go out to eat. And the overseer reached in his desk drawer, pulled out a pistol. He said, "I've had all this I can take." And he pulled the trigger. Fortunately, it was a blank. He was just trying to release some pressure, have a little fun at the guy's expense. The DuPont men went back to the motel, changed their underwear, and they all went out to eat. Oh, let me see if I got it. All right. Let me talk to you a little bit about my Wiscasset career. I came 1989, June 1. I was hired by Tony Cavendish, who I'd worked with in Burlington. Jerry Davis was the vice president of manufacturing. I'd worked with him at Dan River and Burlington, one of the best carters I've ever known. They were two good men. We had a lot of problems. We had problems with dead cotton. The dead cotton is a colloquial term for immature fiber. And if you're not running a good cotton, you got a lot of short, immature fiber, and you don't do a good job of carding, you're going to have some dead cotton. What happens when you dye that fabric? You got little white specks that don't take any dye stuff. So the knitter calls you over, "Jim, I got a problem here. You got dead cotton." And E.J. Snyder came to our rescue a little bit. We brought a knitting machine into the plant. We would knit fabric. I would take samples over to E.J. Snyder. They would dye it for us, and we would see if we're making any progress on getting rid of dead cotton. To my knowledge, they never charged us a penny. Now, that's pretty good home cooking when you got two companies working together like that. But the aphids and the quality issues were all that ways there. I won't bore you with all those tonight, and this is sad pictures for me. This is Wiscasset being torn down. One of the saddest things around for me right now, though, is where Susan Markham grew up. The superintendent house across from the SNAP. Her dad grew up there. She grew up there, and that place is about like that. All right, these are the people of the mills, and this is one that I mentioned, Kent Cook. He's got this hanging on the wall down in his tire store. This is 1916. Where is that, Kent? Front of the Y. Park in front of the Y. Everybody know where that's at? So you got all kind of transportation there, a bunch of people. I read one story online where they were having one of these events, and they were supposed to be playing Monroe in a baseball game. They had pink lemonade, and some fella drank a dozen of those before he stopped. So that made the newspaper back in those days. All right, here we go. Now you're going to see these pictures Anybody know who the man on the front row to the right is, the far right? That is Dallas Durham, Woody Durham's dad. Thank God for Dallas Durham. Thank God for a lot of those guys that were involved in getting Little League Baseball started in Albemarle. All right, this picture, the left, the back row, the man on the left, anybody know him? Cobb Talbert. He was my Little League coach. He was a standout pitcher in semi-pro baseball around here. His son, Glenn Talbert, was a Dixon Foundation scholar. His son, Sid, worked at Wiscasset when I went there. He was an engineer. When all the jobs went away, he went to Concord and worked for the city of Concord. Unfortunately, he passed way, way too early in his 60s. I went to his funeral over at West Albemarle Baptist, and they all talked about the phenomenal job he did with their church youth basketball program. When you grow up with it as a kid and you're taught to pass it on, you pass it on. All right, the third on the back row is my dad. And the shortest guy right there in the middle is my Uncle Kurt, my dad's brother. Bevan Furr, I mentioned a few minutes ago, who hired Fred Barbie as the second man on the front row there with the glasses. All the way to the right on that front row standing is Wells Rogers. Wells is in most of these pictures. He was superintendent. And I'm sure he was out in the mills, and the people knew him and loved him. Remember that date, September 13th, 57. I'm going to give you a hint. Last Friday was September the 13th. Friday the 13th. September the 13th, 57 was also a Friday. And I want you to be thinking about what happened in Albemarle that night. September the 13th, 1957. All right, let's see. What we want you to do at the Historic Society is help us identify these people. The pictures are out over there, and they're going to have ledgers where you can put the names down and so forth. And it's going to be open through January, is that right, Pat? It's going to be open quite a while, okay. Let me rush on through some of these. The lady... 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth person from the right on the front row is my mom. And her day consisted of second shift. My dad was on the first. She was a spinner. And in the good old days when the mills were going good, you'd work 6 days a week. You were lucky you got the week of July the 4th off, and all the mill people went to Myrtle Beach. My cousin Bob and I, he used to go to the beach with us, and he was a gingerbread man, and I'd always get burnt. But my mom there, her routine was get home about midnight, get her a little snack, clean up, and go to bed. And one summer I was working second shift, so I get home with her, and I'd turn on the TV. Anybody remember Jack Parr? Well, his guest that night was Fidel Castro, who was our man in those days, Fidel Castro. But she would work her 8-hour shift, fight those lap-ups, get her a little something to eat, go to bed, get up on Sunday morning, start the fried chicken, get me and my two brothers off to work, clean herself up, walk down the street, down the block from Depot, up North Street to First Presbyterian. And all the men by this time would be out under the tree. They had their suits on, their white shirts, their ties, and their hats. They wore hats back then. And Mom would walk by and they'd all tip their hat. Good morning, Ms. Lisk. Sal Burney's wife would walk by. Good morning, Ms. Burney. And fortunate enough, on occasion, I got to go, when I got a little older, I'd go with my dad to Sunday school class, the Jim Harris Bible Sunday school class. They were on the radio. A.C. Honeycutt had been the initial man. I don't think I ever saw him, but George Stovall was teaching when I would go. And there was a gentleman named Sam Andrew who would sit over there on the keyboards, and he would tickle those things, the Blessed Be the Tie, and that group of men would let it rip. Blessed be the tie that binds, and that was a fun time. Y'all will find you folks in there, hopefully. All right, this is a band sponsored by Wiscasset Mills. And it said, not pictured, conductor Sidney Ludwig. He grew up over in Mount Pleasant. And I think he started his band about 1907. And it was one of the best in the country. And he had some prominent people that came out of that band. One of them was the music director for the schools in Mecklenburg County. All right. I asked y'all what happened September the 13th, 1957. That group of young men shut out a team called Kannapolis, 24-0. That team went 12-0. They allowed 5 touchdowns in 12 games, 7 shutouts. They outscored opponents 469, I believe it was, to 34. And I want to show you the stars of that team. And guess where their parents worked? These are all lint-head kids, every one of them that I'm going to show you. These all played major college football. Don Montgomery there on the left played tight end and defensive end at State, also was a first baseman on the Wolfpack baseball team. Roger Smith over there on the right was a wing back at Chapel Hill. His brother Wade before him. Roger Whitley, number 44 there, was a stud. He lived on Mill Circle. And when the 57 team was honored in 2007, Roger came back and we're talking. He told me he got his incredible leg drive from riding his bicycle up and down the hills of Albemarle. But he weighed 230. He played tackle until his senior year when Toby Webb put him as the fullback in the single wing. And I've literally seen 3 or 4 people hanging on trying to hog collar him and get him down, but he was a stud. And the man on the right is one I respect immensely, Jungle James Johnson. He went on, played up at Wake Forest. He was later an Army chaplain in Vietnam. When the wounded soldier is going to his reward, James Johnson was the man there easing his journey. An incredible young man. He's written a couple books about PTSD, but he lived it. And this is Big Wayne Spivey, who grew up on the Wiscasset Hill. I started writing for newspapers in 1985. I'd started at High Point Enterprise, just moonlighting, I call it. And they let me do a story on Wayne for their football edition. At that time in life, he was running PIP printing in High Point. All right, this is a closer look at some of the people from the American Eford magazines they put out. That's a roller shop on the right. You buff the rolls. If the roll got out around 3/1000ths of an inch, you had window pane unevenness. So roller shops were incredibly important. You had to have buffed, well-buffed cots that ran in a true circle. Very important thing. All right, the guys on the left, now those were card tenders, and a card fixer on the right is a picker. The lap coming off the picker, you fed in the back of the card. The man in the middle is Jennings Ballard. He had a son, Danny Ballard, who was killed in a car wreck, I think, when he was in high school. Fred Brantley, the man on the right in that picture, had 2 sons. Johnny and Frankie. I worked with Johnny one year in the mill in the summertime on an overhauling crew. And shift change was 8 o'clock. He would stand there and drink a Coca-Cola before shift change, and he did not have a dry thread on his shirt. That's how hot the mill was. And this is my dad and my uncle. At this point, they had 79 years service between them. That was 1965. My dad was Jim Harris Bible class. My Uncle Kurt also taught Sunday school for over 50 years over at West Main Methodist. All right, here's some boys that as a kid I heard of. I never saw them play. All I did see saw them play semi-pro, past their prime. But anybody in Albemarle is proud of those guys right there. The man on the second row to the right beside the bat board was my hero, Lefty Lisk. Just imagine named Lisk, and J.W. Lefty Lisk was a star of that team. The guy in front of him, the second on the front row, is Craig Lisk, and he has a son named Jimmy Bubba Lisk. Bubba played at South Stanley, was All-American, went on the state. They made him a wideout receiver. I saw him catch 2 touchdowns against Clemson. I thought the last one had won the game, but they had a drive and beat us. But that was a great bunch of guys. Anybody ever heard of this guy, John Ritchie? When I was at the paper, I was often asked, did Jackie Robinson play for San Diego? He did not. This is John Ritchie. They won the World Series in 39 and 41. In 40, he's on the team playing us here in Albemarle. There's a quote I found on the information about him. He said he hit a few line drives out of the park in batting practice, and they didn't let him play. He went on to break the color barrier in the Pacific Coast League, and I've read somewhere that he and Ted Williams are the 2 best baseball players to ever come out of San Diego, California. Would it have made a difference? I don't know. That's why we play the games. All right, my all-time favorite picture from American and Eford. There's a 10-year-old kid in there and his 8-year-old brother to his right. But I'm always grateful because I understand Dallas Durham had a lot to do with getting Little League started. That's 1953. And I'll promise you one thing. Those uniforms may look like they don't fit us very well. But there's never been a team that ever wore their uniform. I don't care if you're the New York Yankees winning the World Series. No team ever won their uniform with more pride than those 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids. And I'm thankful I had the opportunity that my time was afforded for me as a 10-year-old making believe baseball. Not actually working on the mill floor and looking out the window and making believe. Thank you very much. I appreciate your chance.
Jim, that was a wonderful trip down memory lane, and we thank you very much, and thank you for honoring the people who made such a difference in this community. We really appreciate it. Before you leave tonight, I want to tell you, if you have the schedule for the year, we have one final program, which is going to be Arlington at Rest. Now, it's not a local story, but we're doing it November the 10th, instead of the date that is on the material that you have. Stephen Campbell will be talking to us about Arlington Cemetery and how that came to be. So we hope that you'll join us on Sunday at probably around 2:30. We'll get the information out and be publicizing it. But at 2:30, I believe, on Sunday, November the 10th at 2nd Street Presbyterian Church. It's directly across from the post office here in Albemarle. So we look forward to seeing you then. And Kent Harkey, are you in here? Kent has a few things that he wants to share with you tonight. And also, we have a couple people who are going to be passing out. Jim mentioned during his presentation some handouts that you were going to get. Joyce and Richard Lambert are going to be handing those out, and Kay and Richard Cosgrove. So we thank you folks for helping us out. Be sure everyone gets a copy, or at least your family gets a copy.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Jim. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kent Harkey, and I am proud to be the president of the Stanley County Historical Society for next year. And while we appreciate your attendance and your overwhelming support of our education programs, we also appreciate your financial gifts even more. Your membership fees account for nearly 100% of our society's operating expenses. So in this year, the Board of Directors voted to change our membership renewal from a rolling renewal to an annual renewal to coincide with our fiscal year that begins with October 1st. So for those of you that are members, look for that renewal letter to arrive very soon. If you have not joined the Historical Society, our membership chairman, Les Young, has membership forms in the back for new members, and we would certainly love to have your contribution. Many of you know or may not be aware that the Snuggs House Museum on North 3rd Street has been shuttered for some time for repairs and required maintenance. But we are happy to announce, with proceeds raised from this year's Dinner on Main event, that the hardwood floors have been refinished, and we look forward to opening the doors for public tours once again. As we continue to make improvements to the properties and include the museum houses as a part of the downtown experience, we would like to know what type of events you would attend, or if you would be willing to serve as a volunteer or simply work alongside a master gardener to restore the gardens at the Snuggs House and the Marks House. As you arrived, you were offered a survey card about future events and volunteer opportunities, and we hope that you'll take just a second to complete that card, and we have volunteers at the back who will take those cards, and we will certainly look at those for future events. Our museum director, Megan Sullivan, is Megan here? Megan has a wonderful event planned for a Living History Day and plant sale on Saturday, October 12th from 12 to 4. Would you like to say anything, Megan?
Just that master gardeners will be out on October 12th. They will be selling plants from that Snuggs House, selling our heritage plants. And we are going to have some reenactors. We'll be with rifle fire demonstration. We're going to have some hard tack you guys can try. We'll be spinning everything Joe wrote. So hopefully you guys come out. It's a free event. So October 12th, 12 to 4 o'clock. Hopefully you guys can come out and support us.
Thank you, Megan. So please put that date on your calendar. The floors look great over there, and the house will be open for tours. So we'll look for those opportunities. Last but not least, I'd like to recognize our officers and board members who have completed their terms of service. As I call your name, if you'll please rise. Jonathan Hutchinson is not here tonight, but we have Lydia Morgan. Lydia, if you'd stand, please. And Zelma Udi has completed her term of service. And Janice Mitchner. Janice, if you'll stand, she's at the back. She'll take one of your survey cards. And I'd like to acknowledge our immediate past president, Joyce Lambert. Joyce has done a great job through the years. She's done about everything there is to do at the society. So we appreciate their service. So thank you for attending, and we hope you will join us for refreshments and the opening of the Lint Head Remembered exhibit in the History Center. Thank you and good evening.